Started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Optimus SBR webinar, where we really look forward to presenting an overview of our analytics assessment and improvement methodology on this chilly Tuesday afternoon. Through our discussion today, we will share why we believe an analytics assessment is a pretty critical starting point for any strategic analytics project. We also expect that this webinar will demonstrate how an assessment can lead to a customized step-by-step roadmap that enables better data-driven decisions to ultimately improve business results. My name is Doug Wilson. I lead Optimus SBR's technology consulting and data practices. Joining me today to present our webinar will be Eric Tobias. Eric is a principal within our data team and brings 30 years of experience working across multiple data disciplines within many industry sectors. Eric is actively working with many of our participants on the webinar today, and I'm sure you share my respect for the value he delivers to our clients. We will be recording today's webinar and will provide registrants with a link to the materials in the event that you'd like to reference it subsequent to the webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function available on the screen. Eric will remain available at the conclusion of the webinar to answer any questions you may have. And before I turn things over to Eric, I wanted to ensure people have a little background on Optimus SBR. We are one of the largest independently owned consulting firms in North America. We were founded in 2010 as a result of 3 different firms joining forces. Over the years, we've completed 8 acquisitions, have grown rapidly to now having over 300 staff members. We're really proud of our people, our entrepreneurial and bold culture, and our relationships with clients and the community that have resulted in over 30 awards and a pretty incredible growth story. We have 8 primary service offerings with several discrete capabilities. Today, we're focusing on one of those capabilities within our data and analytics practice. Data and analytics is a growth area for our firm, with recent work ranging from data strategy and governance through to data architecture, infrastructure, engineering, management, and the implementation of analytics tools and practices. Today, we look forward to sharing some insights on how to approach these disciplines in a structured way, starting with an analytics assessment. That's really all I wanted to cover. I look forward to seeing you on subsequent webinars, and I'm pleased to quickly turn things over to Eric, who will dive into the content of our webinar. Over to you, Eric.
All right, thank you, Doug. Let me get this going here. All right, so what are we going to be talking about today? Just to give you kind of an idea here, we're talking about why an analytics assessment is a critical starting point for your analytics projects, where you need to try to figure out where are we today, what do we need to try to achieve, and how are we going to get there. We're going to go over the approach that we use within Optimus and why, and give you some examples of where it has proven to be quite successful for our clients. There's a couple different ways that the projects unfold. We'll go over that. Talk about the process that's used to actually construct that roadmap, and how it can actually help to lead to better results for you. All right, so first thing to go over is that there's a difference between the assessments. There's 2 types of assessments. There are strategic and tactical assessments. To give you an idea of the difference between the 2, strategic assessments tend to be much longer time horizons. This is something that you would do, let's say, over a 2 to 3 year period, as opposed to kind of more short-term goal that you would have under a tactical assessment. You usually will plan strategic analytics more along the lines of a maturity model, for example. There's some industry standards that are out there. And oftentimes you will say, for example, we need to be able to achieve prescriptive analytics within 2 to 3 years on several core operational systems, We also need to make sure that we include data governance, technology, and operational support. So that's a much bigger type of project. That's what we would call a strategic analytics assessment. On the other side, tactical analytics, much, as I said before, much shorter time horizons. Some examples of that might be for integrating 3 to 4 operational systems and getting out one set of reporting capabilities. Or another example we've worked with a client on was bringing in a new enterprise application, and that data had pretty stringent data quality requirements. And so in order to be able to bring this together, they needed to be able to have the data get passed through the data quality and make sure that it was ready for this new enterprise application. Regardless, whether it's a strategic or a tactical assessment, with both of them, you need to know where you are, what you need to try and achieve, and build a plan to get between the two. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So really, keep in mind, analytics maturity is much more of a component of the strategic side of things. And we need to figure out how to align your data and analytics needs with your organization's ability to be able to deliver against that. And another thing also to be very aware of, and we'll mention this a couple of times, is this is definitely a journey, not a destination. So this is something that you're going to need to plan over time and not look at this as being a one-shot approach. It really is unrealistic to try and attempt to mature through all 4 levels of analytics maturity in a single massive project. It just never really works out. Another way to think about this, I think everybody's probably aware of the crawl, walk, run methodology when we talk about this. Or another way to look at this is the don't try to boil the ocean, which is where you try to turn your analytics journey from going from descriptive all the way to prescriptive and do that in a single big massive project. That definitely would fall into the boil the ocean. But what we really want to do is when we're going from crawl, we're talking about the data existing, tends to be siloed within your different departments. The trust may be low because the data is not going through the quality checks that it should. Walk, you start to make better integration between the data. It isn't as much of a manual process. You start to implement governance, who's responsible for different data points, when do they update them. Quality starts improving, decision-making starts to become easier and in the moment that it's required. And then all the way through run. When we get to run, now we're talking about all of your data assets or the relevant data assets being all integrated with each other. Data quality is automated and either self-correcting or notifies you when things need to be addressed. Governance is in place, effective, and responsive as the organization's needs change. So definitely a long distance between crawl and run, and that's part of what we're talking about today. In terms of the actual analytics maturity, this is a fairly simplified version of an analytics maturity model. And it goes from, on the left there, you can see descriptive analytics up through prescriptive analytics. When you're talking about descriptive analytics, what you're really talking about are reporting on patterns that have already occurred. So things that have occurred in the past. Things you might expect to see in there would be revenue increase over time, or the number of contracts issued this quarter. In both of those situations, you're essentially reporting on what's already happened, which is what descriptive analytics is. When we talk about the next level in a strategic analytics maturity assessment, we're looking at diagnostic analytics. Similar in some ways to descriptive, but it also adds a component of what may have caused this. So for example, if you're talking about currency exchange and how it's negatively affecting cash flow, there's a descriptive component, which is currency exchange is negatively impacting it, the cash flow, and then you have a causal component, which is the currency exchange portion of it. So you're not just reporting that cash flows had a negative impact to them, you're also finding the causal component. And that's important for the diagnostic aspect of it. And really what you're trying to do with diagnostic analytics is combine the why and the what. So that's a good step to make on your way. The next one is predictive analytics. At some point, you have enough history, your data quality is adequate enough, and then you have the necessary analysts on your team that know data science or specific applications to your project. and they're able to start producing forecasts. So at some point, the volume of data, you achieve critical mass, and now suddenly you actually have the ability to forecast. So some example of that might be sales forecast for the next 12 months. And in that case, what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand how past sales can be used to identify factors that may actually end up helping to improve your forecast for future sales metrics. So it's kind of that combination between what might cause the biggest influence, and when you look at that, what influence did it have when you started to monitor it? An important note here with predictive analytics is, if at this point you haven't addressed data quality issues, you will start to generate some pretty unreliable predictions. So it's very important to note that your data quality needs to improve considerably as you mature through these different steps. And then finally, over there on the far right, we have prescriptive analytics. It's similar in some ways in that it takes the forecasting component of things, but the difference here is that sometimes you may not know what is actually causing impacts to what you're monitoring and what you're analyzing. So in some cases, it may be easy to say, for example, that our profits are decreasing, and that's because our costs are increasing, but sometimes it may not be quite so obvious. So you can start to bring in advanced concepts in data science like artificial intelligence or machine learning, and they can actually help you run through various iterations and figure out, well, there's actually a correlation between these two things, and nobody really ever thought about that before. So in that type of situation, then the systems actually start to help you to understand things that maybe nobody realized before. Another example with a client that we worked with in the past was a utility company. And essentially what they wanted to be able to do is they wanted to be able to guarantee call center response times, and they wanted to be able to do that all year long. Well, for utility, as you might imagine, there are going to be different periods when weather is going to be a much bigger issue. So they want to be able to predict when they are going to have to staff up the call center based on what prior weather patterns have actually shown to be common. So that's an example of prescriptive analytics. All of that to be said, going from your descriptive through prescriptive, when you're doing an assessment on that maturity, there are 7 things that really contribute to that. So really what you want to do in a strategic assessment is you want to figure out what data assets need to be included. For some of the organizations, maybe you're doing something that involves just core systems, and it's only going to be 4 or 5 main systems, or perhaps it's a complete enterprise data warehouse where you want to bring everything in, and now you're talking about hundreds of systems. But at some point, you need to figure out which of our data assets are actually going to be included there. You also need to understand what analytics capabilities you require. You may not require everything. Your specific situation may require some forecasting of some aspects, but not others. Or perhaps you don't have advanced needs like fraud detection, where you don't need things like machine learning in order to be able to accomplish some of that. You also need to know infrastructure. Most of the stuff that we're talking about here is going to require some components to it that you may or may not already have, and you need to know what are those components. Do we have them already? Do we need to acquire them? How much would it cost to acquire them, etc. So infrastructure, an important part of it. Resource and skills, also very important. Do you have everything in-house already that is required in order to be able to design what you're trying to achieve? Do you have data architects? Do you have data quality engineers? Do you have data scientists? Of the different skill sets that are in there, do you have everything that you need? Growth is a really important fact in dealing with strategic assessments, because inevitably, when dealing with strategic assessments, you're dealing with some of the really core systems that have a lot of data in them. So now you're talking about your data growing at a very, very quick rate. Your capabilities need to grow with them, but not start to slow down considerably. So within growth, you need to understand how your analytical capabilities need to respond as your data changes. You need to be able to show value. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, something called the iceberg effect. But you can't just go to management and say, okay, well, if you give us a budget, we will in 3 years give you these really great dashboards that do everything that you want to see. Having worked in the industry quite a while and seen that approach pitched a few times, that never goes well. So we need to be able to show incremental value as you are onboarding these different capabilities. And then last but not least is, what is it that you require in order to be able to support these processes that you're setting up? It's not enough to just build it and then walk away. There's going to be support required for it. There's going to be operations that have to monitor it. There's going to be training. There's going to be data governance. There's a lot of different processes that need to be put into place in order to keep it running smoothly when you're done. So all of that is in scope when you're doing a strategic assessment. So as you can see, there is a lot more to it than just the data that starts the whole process off. So that was strategic assessments. Talking about tactical assessments, as we said before, they tend to be much smaller. A couple of examples here from clients that we worked with. One client needed to move from manually retrieved reports in various different HR systems. And they wanted to be able to have those reports automatically and always up-to-date, contemporaneous reports available from a single location. So not wanting people to have to go to different systems and run a report, then go into Excel and type some numbers in from multiple different systems and relate those numbers to each other and do lookups. That is what was causing them issues, and they wanted to move away from. Another client wanted to be able to create secure, automated, reliable, high-quality data. So they needed high-quality data in order to feed a core system that was being brought on board. And the important thing there was that the data needed to be available in the moment it was required. It couldn't be done retroactively. So having to go back in later and say, oh, well, we need to bring in this new source of information, that wouldn't work. It would put projects behind months and months. Another example would be to identify trends in data. You have to be able to bring data together with a sufficient quality to be able to do things like forecasting. So in order to do that, if you want to be able to do forecasting, you need to be able to verify that the quality of the data coming in is being monitored. So those are some fairly specific tactical assessments that we work with clients on. So similarly as before, there are some similar aspects to strategic assessments, but when talking about tactical assessments, one of the main things is we start with the end goal. So unlike a strategic assessment that's usually done based on maturity, progress over years, a tactical assessment usually says we need to be able to achieve X. Once you define that goal, then you figure out which data assets are required to support that goal. Then you also need to figure out, does that particular end goal have some specific analytical capabilities required? Or is it very basic capabilities? Some examples, basic capabilities would be dashboards. Advanced capabilities would be things like forecasting or model automation. If you don't need those, even easier. But again, kind of like with strategic assessments, we also need to be able to identify infrastructure that has to go along with that. It's not enough in some cases to just run it on what you already have, in which case then obviously your IT departments will want to get involved and they'll want to know, okay, well, what are we going to need to add? Where can we get that? How much is that going to cost? What is maintenance on that? So there's a lot of factors that are involved with infrastructure. So that's also a very good component there to focus on. It should be also an iterative process, similar to strategic analysis, where you don't want to try and achieve end results over a single end result over a long period of time. In this case, we want to do this a little bit at a time. So if it's multiple dashboards, do one at a time. If it's a single dashboard as an end result, bringing in different data assets one at a time, for example. In addition, as before, kind of the operational support aspect of it, it's not enough to just create it and walk away. It needs to have ongoing support. So this is going to be part of that. And then finally, the pre-existing processes. When you're dealing with tactical assessments, a lot of times what you end up needing is you need to integrate that with something that already exists. So where do the handoffs occur between your different systems? Is this tactical outcome, does it need to feed somewhere else? Or does it depend on some other system, in which case we need to know what those handoffs are. So how does it integrate in with things that already exist? So those are some of those tactical assessment fundamentals. And going on a little bit further, so we want to talk about how do we get there? Likely what you're thinking of when you're thinking about an assessment and bringing on board your analytical capabilities is going to be how much is it going to cost and how long will it take? And those are absolutely important. Those are definitely fundamental questions you should be asking. But you also want to make sure that you're not forgetting some of the really other critical things in there, such as, do we have all the resources we need to achieve this? If you need data science, do you have data scientists? You're going to need some data architecture. Do you have data architects that are able to work on the project and be able to work on those deliverables? What infrastructure are you going to need? Do you have special data requirements such as privacy data or healthcare data? That makes a big difference on how you need to handle some of this. Do you have any particularly challenging analytical requirements such as fraud detection, customer life cycle or journey modeling, big data, et cetera? So there's a lot of things that you need to think about, just how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And that's where the assessment process comes in, is to help remember to cover all of those. Where a lot of organizations start is they start with common operational systems, reporting capabilities coming from individual products, and then you have your business users accessing those end user systems one at a time, which may work just great most of the time. But if you need to bring data together between systems, a lot of times where organizations start is they start by actually manually transcribing data between systems, which is very error prone, very manual, and starts to incur a lot of creation and maintenance time. And the more of it you create, the more maintenance it ends up incurring. So it ends up with a snowball effect. So instead of having everybody go to individual systems to run reports, we want to bring it together. In order to do that, the data needs to be brought together into a data warehouse or a data mart. Kind of there on that diagram in the lower right hand, you can actually see that there's a structure to that. I won't go over that in great detail. Since you will have a copy of this webinar later, you'll be able to take a look at this in a bit more detail. Suffice to say that there's a central place you bring the data together. That data flows into this central location. We'll call this a data mart. So the data flows into the data mart and then is consolidated and then flows out of the data mart into your other systems. We would call that a data pipeline. The data pipeline is automated, flowing constantly, has data quality built into it, et cetera. Then what you do is you build your analytical infrastructure on top of that data mart or data warehouse. So you now have a single location reading from a single source and bringing that data together. In some situations, you may end up with, for example, a few data marts that contribute to your analytics, but the premise is still basically the same. Instead of analytics going against source operational systems, you actually bring it all together first. At that point, then your business users, they actually access the analytics from a single location. So they no longer have to go to multiple systems and do Excel sheets and integrate and create dashboards in Excel. They do it from the consolidated platform. But again, how do we get from where you start to where you really should be getting there on the right? Infrastructure and data, is that all you really need in order to be able to achieve this? And unfortunately, the answer is definitely not. It takes a lot more to that. And we mentioned the iceberg effect earlier. And as you can see here, and I've run into this so many times in my career, I can't even tell you, but you have management and business users that are seeing reports and dashboards, and life is grand, and they don't realize that there's a whole lot that has to occur underneath those dashboards in order for this to run effectively. So there's specific information that has to arrive on time. It has to be of good quality. It has to be the right context so that they're understanding the numbers in the context in which they're meant to be used. So there's a substantial investment that needs to occur below those reports and dashboards. So how do we create a plan then that identifies the results, it determines what your capabilities are, what data and infrastructure you need, shows incremental value to your organization, tells you when you've succeeded, and does all of that and defines what skills you need in order to achieve all of that. So the analytics assessment and improvement methodology that Optimus uses, and certainly we recommend, is 6 phases. There's an analytic, we align stakeholder expectations, which involves engaging key stakeholders, making sure everybody knows what we're trying to achieve. It then goes to an exercise of identifying your source data, what are the data assets that are going to need to be included in this project. Usually that involves talking to subject matter experts, for example. Eliciting requirements, that is, what is it that you need the data to be able to do for you? Is there certain types of analysis that are required? Are there certain types of visuals that are required, etc.? We then need to align the data and those requirements in and capability mapping. Usually that involves working with the subject matter experts within the organization to identify which things go together and make sure that everything has a match. Sometimes we run into situations where clients have a capability they require, but they don't have a source for that information. And so we have to help them figure out how they would achieve that. Once you know the data you have, what you need to achieve, map between the two, then you can figure out, okay, here's the infrastructure that's going to be required to support that. Once we have the infrastructure figured out, then we can go and produce the recommendations and the roadmap to the organization and then start the process of implementing that. So think about it this way. There are the normal 5 W's, I think most of us are aware of, and an H that's in there. So who, which is which resources or skill sets need to participate in producing the goals or deliverables? What does each of the resources need to work on in order to achieve the goals and deliverables? Where will they do it? Meaning, what infrastructure are they going to be working on? When will they do it? And what we mean by that is, what's the sequence in which the deliverables need to occur? And what are the dates on which they need to occur in order to achieve your timelines? Why is who depends on each deliverable. So who needs to be done first so that the next person in line can do what they need to do. And then the how. And that is, it's not enough to just say, okay, you're going to deliver X dashboard. There are subtasks that are part of that. So how are they going to achieve that? So it's the standard 5 W's I think everybody's aware of. That's really what the assessment is kind of all about. To give you a couple of examples of how we've done this with some of our clients, we worked with a worldwide package logistics company that processed hundreds of millions of packages a year, and they used a third-party application to actually do their analytics. What they needed to be able to do, they were finding extreme delays in getting the third party to generate their reports for them. They wanted to be able to consolidate their analytics. They wanted to be able to deploy analytics at multiple customers as well as in a cloud environment. They wanted it all automated. They wanted the data updated and current at all times. And they realized that they were going to need to move to new infrastructure to do this. In their case, they were going to move to Azure. So what we did is we built out 3 phases for them, a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term, set specific goals for each of those. And then we helped them with the short-term, and they're currently running with that. And what they're finding is the infrastructure is implemented, the data is integrated, and they are able to refresh billions of rows of data in 7 minutes or less, which is keeping their clients very happy. The clients are achieving new insights, and they've even started receiving new requests for reports, which they're able to assemble from the existing data mart that was built. So they're able to start getting some synergy out of the fact that they've built this. As well, we had to evaluate a number of different combinations of infrastructure. There was a fairly complex environment. We had to look at different databases, different data visualization tools, different ETL tools, for example. So we had to go through and figure out all the various different combinations and what the impact on the roadmap would look like, what the impacts on budgeting would look like, et cetera. So there's a lot to it, in this one specifically on infrastructure. We also had a regional transportation authority in the US. They had 32 different operational systems that needed to be brought together. Everything was very siloed. It was very difficult to get data out. So they would have management urgent requests that came along, and it would take weeks sometimes to bring those together because it had to be done manually. There was no automated way to do that. So what we recommended as a result of the assessment process was that they put together an analytical data mart. There were 40 distinct capabilities they required from an analytics perspective that we had to work on. So we helped them put that together. The roadmap that we ended up building with them, they actually wanted to focus on 5 different possible cases or scenarios. We helped them figure out what the ramifications of each of those would be, cost to infrastructure, et cetera. They are currently, the executive team loved it. They jumped right on that. They ended up implementing a variation of scenario 1 that we helped them put together. Just to give you an idea, what we did with them and their analytical capabilities, we collect a lot of information. Again, I'm not going to go over this, obviously. Just to give you an idea of the depth of the information that we end up generating as part of that process. And then the last example, a nonprofit that we worked with, they had 200 data assets from 35 different operational systems running on 14 different database platforms. So there was a lot going on. Again, this was very error prone because when they bring data together from those 35 different systems, it was done manually. So we had to help them figure out how to apply a maturity model to what they were trying to do. It was laid out over several years. We identified 46 different analytical capabilities they required, data governance being a very key component. And we captured a lot of information. Here's one page of notes, of which there were actually several hundred notes that we took in the process of all of the workshops that we did. And then we built a roadmap for them. This is a Gantt chart that shows kind of the timing of the various different phases. They are currently in the process of implementing the quick win phase. I think they're about to finish that up, and then they'll start the short-term phase. They didn't need any additional infrastructure, which was good. The data warehouse is in place. They are building those visuals, and the internal team is very excited about what they're starting to achieve as a result of that. So just to give you a summary, winding things up here, keep in mind analytics is a journey, not a destination. If you do it as a journey, you'll find it much more predictable in planning ahead of time. There are numerous technologies, architectures, and approaches that are possible, but if you apply this consistent, repeatable methodology, you will get much better results a lot faster. Don't get stuck just on how much and how long. As we said before, there's a lot of other things that are necessary: skills, infrastructure, putting a time-boxed work plan together, quality thresholds, etc. Our analytics assessment and improvement methodology comes from a lot of real-world experience dealing with a lot of different clients in some very complex industries, use cases, sizes of organizations, etc. Also keep in mind, commencing an assessment and creating that roadmap that comes out of that is a much lower cost way to reduce the implementation risks you might run into as you are maturing those analytics capabilities.